The grand hall was already overflowing with moneyed voices and polished laughter, the kind of sound that came from people who had never been told no in their lives. Strings of pearls clinked against crystal glasses as the Whitmore family's annual gala moved into full swing, the kind of event where invitations were whispered about months in advance. For generations, this gathering had been the domain of dynasties who treated legacy like a weapon. Every polished step on the marble floor announced power. Every handshake was a silent calculation of who was rising and who was fading. Then the whispers started. A ripple ran across the room when Amara Johnson entered. She didn't arrive with an entourage, didn't announce herself. One woman in a midnight blue gown crossing the threshold was enough to tilt the air. Some eyes narrowed, others widened, but none looked away. Who invited her? A voice hissed near the champagne tower. She doesn't belong here, another whispered, as though the very sight of her was an intrusion. Amara didn't falter. Her shoulders remained straight, her gaze steady. She had walked into rooms far colder than this, though never so drenched in old entitlement. Every glance that brushed across her was laced with judgment. Too young, too bold, too black to stand on equal ground with families who measured worth by surnames etched on plaques. Across the floor, Eleanor Whitmore, the matriarch in her emerald gown, tilted her head just enough to signal disapproval. It was subtle, but everyone saw it. That single gesture gave permission for the quiet ridicule to grow louder. Laughter sharpened at Amara's expense, hidden behind jeweled fans and champagne flutes. She stood at the center of it all, holding her ground as if the ridicule had bounced off her like rain against stone. There was no apology in her posture, no retreat in her eyes. If you're already gripped by how this story begins, take a second to subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your country might be closer to this kind of arrogance than you think. Back at the gala, the atmosphere shifted another notch. Charles Whitmore Jr., the heir apparent, stepped forward with a grin that didn't touch his eyes. His tuxedo gleamed under the chandeliers, but his words carried the sting of dismissal. "I think you've mistaken this for the charity dinner next weekend," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Those events welcome everyone." A ripple of smirks and murmurs followed. Isabella Whitmore, his younger sister, raised her phone slightly, her painted lips curling into amusement. She wasn't going to miss the chance to immortalize the family's latest performance of superiority. Amara's gaze met theirs. For a moment, the chatter dimmed under the weight of her silence. She didn't rush to defend herself, didn't explain her invitation. That was the first move that unsettled them. They expected fluster, apology, retreat. Instead, they found composure, and composure was dangerous. Whispers thickened like fog. "She must be someone's assistant. Look at that dress. Borrowed, no doubt. She's bold to stand here." But even as they mocked, an undercurrent of curiosity crept into the room. Who was she, really? What kind of woman walked into the Whitmore Gala without blinking, despite every eye trying to push her out? A waiter passed with a silver tray, glasses chiming faintly. Amara reached for one, her hand steady, her reflection catching in the crystal. The gesture was ordinary, yet it silenced a corner of the room. There was dignity in her calm, and it burned against their arrogance like quiet fire. Charles Jr. leaned closer, lowering his voice in a tone that wasn't meant for her alone, but for every spectator circling the scene. "You'll find that people here know where they stand," he murmured, "and where they don't." The laugh that followed from the crowd wasn't just at Amara. It was an attempt to remind everyone of the unspoken rules. But what none of them realized was that the woman they mocked held in her hands the fate of their entire empire. And before the night was over, one move would cost the Whitmore family more than pride. Charles Whitmore Jr. crossed the marble floor with the confidence of someone who had never once been made to doubt his place in the world. His stride was deliberate, shoulders squared, tuxedo tailored to perfection. Guests instinctively parted to give him space, as if invisible ropes pulled the crowd back whenever a Whitmore moved. He stopped directly in front of Amara, tilting his head with a smile that felt polished yet hollow. His gaze flicked once over her gown, then lingered, as if cataloging every thread and deciding it wasn't worthy of the room. "You must be working the event," Charles said smoothly. His tone dipped in feigned courtesy but sharpened by mockery. "It's bold to mingle in the middle of the floor instead of near the serving stations." A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the nearby cluster of guests. They leaned closer, eager for the performance. Amara's eyes lifted to meet his. She didn't flinch. The calm in her stare held him longer than he expected, forcing him to look away for the briefest moment before recovering his smirk. From across the room, Isabella Whitmore angled her phone just so, ensuring her camera captured every second. The glow of the screen reflected in her diamond necklace as she whispered to her friend, "This is going to get views. People love watching someone pretend they belong." She tapped record, her giggle barely concealed. For Isabella, cruelty was currency, and tonight she was about to spend generously. Eleanor Whitmore, standing near the grand piano with a glass of vintage champagne, allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile perfected at countless social functions, a mask stretched tight over contempt. She drifted forward, voice soft, laced with etiquette that carried venom beneath the surface. "My dear," Eleanor began, brushing a jeweled hand across her gown as if dismissing lint. "It takes courage to enter a room like this without knowing the traditions. One does hope you were properly instructed on etiquette, though I suppose some things cannot be taught." The nearby guests chuckled, though their laughter was brittle, careful. None wanted to be the one left out of the Whitmore's cruel joke. Amara's fingers tightened slightly on the stem of her glass. That was all. No cutting retort, no defensive fumble. Just stillness, the kind that unsettled those expecting chaos. She studied Eleanor the way a scientist studies a specimen, with quiet interest and not an ounce of fear. Charles leaned closer, lowering his voice but still loud enough for Isabella's camera to catch. "You see, our family believes in legacy. That means certain people rise. Others know their place. You understand, don't you?" Amara's lips curved the slightest degree, not into a smile, but into something unreadable. Her silence weighed heavier than any rebuttal. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She wasn't accustomed to composure. Politeness was supposed to disarm, but here it bounced back, leaving her own words exposed as shallow cruelty. Isabella couldn't resist chiming in, stepping forward with her phone lifted higher. "Say something for the camera. My followers will love this. An outsider at the Whitmore Gala, it's historic." Her laughter rang false, brittle around the edges, but the people surrounding her laughed anyway. For the Whitmores, mockery wasn't just entertainment. It was a ritual. And tonight, Amara was supposed to be the sacrifice, but her silence, her poise, was cutting through the performance like a knife through velvet. The guests closest to her were beginning to shift uncomfortably, as though they sensed the script was turning against its authors. Eleanor tried once more, raising her chin. "One must always remember, appearances speak louder than words. An unsuitable gown can reveal far more than a resume ever could." Amara finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "That's comforting to hear, because tonight it won't be my gown that defines the future of this family. It will be their choices." The words dropped like stones into water, ripples spreading fast. Some laughed nervously. Others looked down, pretending to check their phones. Charles Jr.'s smirk faltered, just slightly. Isabella lowered her phone, suddenly unsure if she'd just captured the beginning of a viral triumph, or the first crack in her family's carefully guarded image. Amara raised her glass, her gaze steady, her posture unbroken. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't retreat. She simply stood, dignified, observant, while the weight of arrogance pressed down on the Whitmores, who had no idea that the foundations beneath them were already starting to shift. And somewhere, in the back of the room, an older guest leaned toward her companion and whispered, "She's not here by accident." The question hung in the air like an unsheathed blade. If she wasn't here by accident, then why was she here? The Whitmores weren't finished. What began as whispers and side comments now shifted into open spectacle. Isabella Whitmore, glowing under the light of her phone screen, raised her camera higher and hit the Go Live button. Her voice rang out, cheerful and venomous at the same time. "Everyone, you won't believe this. Look who thinks she belongs at the Whitmore Gala." The lens zoomed shamelessly toward Amara. Guests who had been murmuring behind raised glasses straightened their posture, eager to be caught in the frame. Some leaned in, smiling broadly, pretending it was all harmless fun. Others looked away, ashamed but unwilling to step in. The comment section on Isabella's screen exploded almost instantly. Who invited her? Service staff sneaking into first class, LOL. Bet she came through the back door. Isabella laughed and read them out loud like a master of ceremonies. Each cruel remark fueled her, and every laugh from the crowd grew louder. The sound wasn't playful. It was the roar of entitlement ganging up on a single target. Amara stood in the center of it all, steady as stone. She didn't reach for her phone, didn't shrink under the spotlight Isabella forced onto her. Instead, she let the noise wash over her, unflinching. The silence she carried was louder than their jeers, unsettling in a way no one admitted aloud. Charles Jr. leaned toward his sister, grinning. "Make sure you get her face. People should know she actually thought she was invited." The crowd erupted again. Laughter bounced off the high ceilings, spilling into every corner of the hall. Even the staff carrying trays of champagne looked down, their discomfort hidden behind polite masks. Eleanor Whitmore added her own poison, voice pitched for the cameras. It is admirable, really, when people reach above their station. One can't help but admire the courage. Though perhaps next year we'll have to send clearer instructions on attire. The words dripped from her lips like honey laced with venom. Every guest understood what she meant. Her subtle racism, delivered as social etiquette, was far crueler than Charles's direct insults. Isabella twirled her phone for effect, catching Amara from every angle. "This is history, folks. The night an outsider tried to pose as one of us." She giggled, tilting the phone so her followers could see Eleanor smiling in agreement. The comment stream scrolled faster. Entitlement at its finest. She's lucky they haven't thrown her out yet. This is comedy gold. And yet, among the sneers, another type of comment slipped through. "Who is she, though? She looks too calm. I'd be nervous. Why isn't she? That woman isn't average. Watch." Isabella ignored those. She didn't realize her own audience was beginning to sense something the Whitmores could not. Amara's composure wasn't weakness. It was the eye of a storm. Maya's narration weaves in here. Silence is often mistaken for defeat. But silence can also be strategy. A pause before the strike. Back in the hall, Charles Jr. clapped loudly to draw more attention. "Well, let's toast to our guest, to ambition, without direction." His glass rose high and others followed, though their laughter sounded thinner now, forced. Amara raised her own glass, but she didn't join the toast. She simply lifted it, locked eyes with Charles, and drank in silence. The crowd faltered, their confidence rattled by her refusal to play along. The live stream continued rolling, broadcasting cruelty to millions. Isabella leaned in once more, eyes sparkling with superiority. "Any words for the viewers, darling? Tell them how it feels to stand among giants." Finally, Amara spoke. Her voice was even, her tone unshaken. "I don't speak to giants, I speak to people, and some people are about to learn the difference." The words sliced through the hall. Some guests gasped softly, realizing they had just witnessed the first crack in the Whitmores' carefully scripted humiliation. Isabella froze, her camera still pointed at Amara, unsure whether she had just filmed victory or the beginning of a downfall. The comment section lit up. "What does she mean by that? Yo, she's not scared at all. Watch, this is about to flip." Isabella's smile flickered, the energy of the room shifting ever so slightly. Eleanor's hand tightened on her champagne glass. Charles Jr.'s jaw clenched. For the first time that evening, the Whitmores felt a sensation they rarely encountered: uncertainty. And Amara, silent again, composed, let it linger, knowing the longer she stood unshaken, the closer their arrogance came to collapse. The live stream was still rolling, comments still pouring in, but every person in that ballroom sensed it. The spectacle had turned. The question no one dared ask aloud echoed like a drumbeat in their minds. What kind of woman stands untouched when the entire room tries to break her? The music from the string quartet faltered as a single voice cut across the chatter. Lord Whitmore, tall and broad-shouldered despite his 63 years, raised one hand for silence. The effect was instant. Conversations died mid-sentence, glasses lowered, and all eyes turned toward the man who carried his family's legacy like a crown. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonant, polished from decades of boardrooms and banquets. "This evening, we celebrate more than fortune, we celebrate heritage." A murmur of approval rolled through the guests. Eleanor Whitmore glowed at his side, her smile tight, her eyes flicking toward Amara like a warning shot. Lord Whitmore paced slowly, his presence commanding. "In this house, wealth is not measured by sudden success or fleeting ventures. It is measured by bloodlines. By families who built, who endured, who carried forward traditions across centuries." He paused deliberately, letting the weight of his words fill the hall. His gaze swept the crowd, then landed firmly on Amara. "Not outsiders," he said, his tone dipped in disdain. "Not those who appear from nowhere, imagining they can claim a place at the table built by our forefathers." Gasps and whispers flared, quickly followed by applause. The rhythm of approval wasn't just polite, it was forceful, as though the crowd needed to prove loyalty to the patriarch's creed. Guests clapped harder, nodding, their approval echoing off the high ceilings. Amara's fingers tightened around her clutch, the leather pressed into her palm, a reminder to hold steady. She had expected whispers, even open mockery. But this, a speech weaponizing centuries of exclusion, revealed the Whitmore's true nature. She inhaled slowly, refusing to look away. She knew her purpose tonight extended beyond appearances. She was here to discuss a potential investment, one the Whitmores desperately needed, though they didn't yet know how desperately. Leaving now would be an easy surrender, but her presence had already unsettled them. That in itself was power. Lord Whitmore extended a hand toward the chandeliers, as if presenting the hall as evidence of his claim. "Our families carried this nation on their shoulders. Steel, shipping, finance, railroads, every industry touched by the Whitmore bloodline. These walls were not built by chance. They are monuments to heritage." Polite laughter bubbled in response, followed by more applause. Isabella raised her phone again, panning across the guests, catching Amara's face deliberately. The live stream remained active, broadcasting every cruel cheer, every approving nod, every word of the patriarch's exclusion. "Some may think money is enough," Lord Whitmore continued, his eyes narrowing. "But money without breeding is just noise. Wealth without history is fragile, ready to vanish with the first gust of failure. That is why certain families must remain at the helm, families like ours." The audience clapped again, though less unified than before. A few glanced at Amara, discomfort creeping into their expressions. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was open racism, bold and unashamed. Amara lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance but in quiet acknowledgement. She didn't argue, didn't storm out, didn't crumble. She absorbed every word, every clap, every smirk, and filed them away like evidence. Lord Whitmore pressed on. "We must protect these gatherings, these traditions, from dilution. From those who believe an education or a new company can grant them access to legacies they did not earn. Blood cannot be bought. Legacy cannot be imitated." The room erupted in another round of applause, louder this time, as though the audience was desperate to reassure the patriarch of their loyalty. Amara's silence cut through the noise like a blade. She wasn't there to win their approval. She was there to remind them that true power didn't always come draped in centuries-old family names. The patriarch lifted his glass, raising it high, to heritage, to the strength of lineage, and to keeping tradition alive. Glasses clinked, cheers rang out, but the cheer sounded brittle at the edges. Not every guest clapped as loudly as before. Some shifted in their seats, their gazes flickering between Amara and the Whitmores. They sensed the cruelty had crossed into dangerous territory, the kind that could echo far beyond the walls of a gala. Eleanor touched her husband's arm, her voice a polished dagger. "A fine reminder for all, dearest. Some lessons must be spoken plainly." Amara sipped her drink, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. Inside a storm gathered, not of rage, but of resolve. She hadn't traveled here for spectacle. She was here because the Whitmore's empire, glittering on the surface, was rotting beneath. They needed her, though they mocked her. And she would let them reveal themselves fully before she chose her moment to strike. The applause dwindled, replaced by murmurs. Isabella's phone captured it all, thousands of viewers typing faster as the patriarch's words spread online. And through it all, Amara stood steady, refusing to give them the satisfaction of retreat. For the first time in his long reign, Lord Whitmore found himself staring at someone who didn't bend under his words. Someone whose silence threatened to dismantle everything louder than his speech could ever protect. The question lingered, unspoken but heavy in the air. What power did this woman carry that she could stand so unshaken under the weight of a dynasty's scorn? The Whitmores thought they were ridiculing a stranger. To them, Amara Johnson was a misplaced guest in an expensive gown, a young black woman who had somehow slipped past the velvet rope. What they didn't realize was that their laughter, their barbs, their performance for the cameras had already signed the death warrant on their empire. Because Amara was not just any guest. She was the founder and CEO of Novasphere Technologies, a global AI logistics company that had redefined how corporations moved goods, tracked supply chains, and cut costs across continents. From Silicon Valley to Singapore, her name was spoken in boardrooms with a mix of admiration and fear. Competitors who ignored her innovations ended up obsolete within months. Governments consulted her systems to safeguard national security. Investors fought for a fraction of her company's shares. And here she was, standing silent in the Whitmore's ballroom, absorbing their insults without revealing a single detail of who she was. The irony was sharp. Whitmore Holdings, the centuries-old empire hosting this very gala, was crumbling behind its polished facade. Its shipping division, once the backbone of their fortune, had been bleeding losses for years. Their real estate arm was overleveraged. Their younger executives made reckless bets on ventures that yielded nothing but debt. The family's desperate solution had been clear: attract new capital. And the largest opportunity on their horizon was a partnership with Novasphere. A merger or investment from Amara's company could have saved them, bought them time, restored their prestige. But they didn't see the woman who held their lifeline standing in front of them. They only saw the color of her skin, the audacity of her presence, the courage it took to meet their eyes without flinching. Their arrogance had blinded them. Guests whispered, unaware of the stakes. They thought the night's spectacle was entertainment. They thought the Whitmore's insults were cutting deep. In reality, every laugh, every dismissive glance was a shovel of dirt over the family's financial grave. Amara's background was not a story of inheritance. She hadn't been handed wealth on a silver platter. Born in Detroit to a schoolteacher mother and a mechanic father, she grew up understanding what it meant to stretch every dollar. What it meant to be told certain doors would always be closed. She learned early that talent and brilliance weren't enough in a world eager to remind her of the limits it placed on her. But those limits became her fuel. At 19, she built her first algorithm capable of predicting shipping delays weeks before they happened. By 25, she had transformed that breakthrough into Novasphere, a startup that grew so rapidly global corporations scrambled to sign contracts. By 30, she was a billionaire, her company valued higher than entire industries combined. And tonight, the very family mocking her survival, her presence, her blackness, had begged for her attention. Their lawyers had sent proposals, their advisors had pleaded for meetings, and when she agreed to attend the gala to consider their offer, she had come prepared to listen. But she hadn't expected their true selves to reveal themselves so quickly. Maya's voice folds in here. This is what racism costs. It blinds the powerful to reality. It convinces them that heritage can replace innovation, that cruelty is strength. It convinces them they're untouchable. Until the truth arrives dressed in a midnight blue gown. Across the hall, Charles Jr. still smirked. Eleanor still whispered. Isabella still streamed her cruel performance. None of them realized the woman they treated as an outsider was the very person whose signature could decide whether their company survived another year. Amara's silence wasn't surrender. It was patience. Every insult was a ledger entry, every slight a calculation. She wasn't merely enduring their cruelty, she was measuring it. Because when she finally spoke, when she finally chose, the cost would be more than humiliation. It would be billions. She tightened her grip on her clutch once more, not out of nerves, but as a reminder of why she was here. She hadn't built an empire just to be tolerated. She hadn't fought her way to the top to beg for respect. Tonight, the Whitmores thought they were exposing her. In truth, they were exposing themselves, to the world, to her, to their own destruction. And Amara, calm and steady, was content to let them continue. The room buzzed with laughter again, Isabella's live stream climbing in viewers by the second. Yet beneath the glitter, beneath the cruelty, an invisible countdown had already begun. Because the Whitmores didn't know it yet, but they were mocking the only woman who could save them. And she was about to decide if they were worth saving at all. The Whitmores' applause still echoed faintly when the first murmurs of dissent began to stir in the crowd. Not everyone clapped with conviction. Some shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Amara's poised silence and Lord Whitmore's thunderous declarations about bloodlines. At the edge of the room, an elderly woman leaned forward in her chair. Lady Margaret Ashcroft, 81 years old, carried the presence of a matriarch in her own right. Her family had been wealthy for generations as well, but where the Whitmores boasted cruelty, Margaret had survived long enough to know arrogance was a fragile shield. Her gaze lingered on Amara, not with suspicion, but with a searching intensity. She whispered to the gentleman beside her, "She has Grace's eyes." Her companion looked puzzled. Margaret's words were more than idle observation. Decades earlier, she had studied alongside a brilliant young woman named Grace, who had defied the limitations of her time to enter fields women were pushed away from. Grace's granddaughter, Margaret realized, could very well be standing right there in front of her. Margaret's lips curved, but not in mockery, in recognition, in quiet hope. Across the ballroom, another figure watched with a different kind of interest. Robert Lang, a financial journalist with a reputation for uncovering truths. Corporations prayed would stay buried, stood near the back with his phone in hand. He hadn't come for the champagne or the glamour. He had come for confirmation. Rumors had long circulated that Whitmore Holdings was a decaying empire dressed in gold. As Isabella streamed her cruel commentary and Charles Jr. boasted of heritage, Robert scrolled through documents saved to his phone. Debt sheets, false quarterly reports, whispers from disgruntled employees. Everything he had gathered pointed to collapse. And tonight, he saw with his own eyes why the Whitmores were blind to it. Arrogance had replaced strategy. Robert's gaze fell on Amara. She wasn't just enduring, she was calculating. For a journalist like him, that was a story worth more than all the Whitmores' empty speeches. Not far away, Elena Cortez stood silently by the refreshment table. Once a financial manager inside Whitmore Holdings, she had resigned quietly after uncovering how the company's books had been twisted to hide billions in debt. She had been dismissed as incompetent, whispered out of her career. But Elena had kept her files, her evidence, her voice. When her eyes met Amara's across the room, she didn't see a stranger. She saw someone carrying the same weight of being underestimated, dismissed, cast aside, yet standing unbroken. Lady Margaret rose slowly, cane in hand, and began to make her way toward Amara. Conversations hushed slightly as the elderly matriarch approached, her reputation commanding respect even the Whitmores couldn't fully ignore. Eleanor Whitmore's jaw tightened. She didn't like anyone stepping into her theater of control. Margaret stopped just a few feet from Amara. Her eyes softened. "My dear, you carry a strength I recognize." Grace would have been proud. The words were cryptic to some, but to Amara, they were grounding. Someone in this hall saw her not as an intruder, but as an heir to resilience. Nearby, Robert snapped a discreet photo, not of Amara, not of Margaret, but of Isabella's phone screen, still streaming to millions. The evidence of public humiliation paired with his financial documents would tell a devastating story once released. Elena moved closer as well, her presence quiet, almost unnoticed. She slipped through the crowd, her glass untouched, her eyes fixed on Amara. She knew what it felt like to be silenced, and she wasn't going to watch it happen again without some form of resistance. Bit by bit, the balance shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not yet. But certain guests began gravitating toward Amara, whether out of curiosity, respect, or recognition of something deeper. The energy in the room fractured, one half clinging to the Whitmores' narrative of superiority, the other quietly questioning if they were watching an empire crumble in real time. Charles Jr. noticed. His smile strained as he caught sight of Margaret near Amara. Isabella, too absorbed in her live feed, missed the subtle turn of loyalty happening behind her lens. Eleanor, however, felt it, the sting of control slipping. She stepped forward, determined to reclaim the room. "Lady Margaret, surely you don't mean to indulge this disruption," she said, her tone sugared but sharp. Margaret's reply was cool, deliberate. "Disruption, Eleanor, is often just the truth refusing to stay quiet." The crowd froze, their silence louder than any toast. Amara didn't move. She didn't need to. Allies were beginning to step from the shadows, and the Whitmores' cruelty had turned their own stage into a battlefield they could no longer dominate. For the first time that night, the dynasty's arrogance was not met with blind applause. It was met with doubt. And doubt, in a family built on nothing but reputation, was the beginning of collapse. The ballroom had begun to fracture into uneasy camps, those still clapping for the Whitmores' cruelty and those watching Amara with growing curiosity. But Isabella was not about to surrender the spotlight. Her phone, still streaming live, had ballooned in viewers. Every cruel word spilled across the screen in real time, feeding an audience that craved scandal. She stepped directly into Amara's path, blocking her near the edge of the grand staircase. The phone camera was angled high, its red recording light blinking like an accusation. "There she is," Isabella declared, her voice coated in amusement. "The guest who thinks she's royalty because she snuck into the royal gala." Laughter rippled again, thinner now, but present. Isabella thrived on it, twirling the phone so her followers could see Amara's face. "Look at her," Isabella continued, tilting her head in mock analysis. "The gown's nice, though clearly not couture. The walk, stiff, and that voice." She let the words trail before leaning closer, her smile venomous. "Darling, don't pretend. You'll never be one of us." Amara remained still, her eyes steady. The sting wasn't the words themselves. She had heard far worse, but the performance of it. The glee in Isabella's cruelty, the applause from people who should have known better. Maya's narration slows here. This is what racism looks like when it sheds its disguise. No polite barbs, no veiled suggestions, just raw contempt broadcast to the world like entertainment. And still, she stood silent. The comments flooded Isabella's stream. "Drag her, Isa? She really thought she belonged, LMAO. Entitlement is wild." Others, however, typed a different tune. "Why isn't she backing down? Her silence is power. Careful, this could backfire." But Isabella ignored them, pressing harder. She circled Amara like a predator, phone camera catching every angle. "You probably rehearsed this, didn't you? Practiced standing tall in the mirror, told yourself tonight you'd pass as one of us. But here's the truth. Heritage can't be imitated. You'll always be on the outside looking in." The crowd tittered, but unease crept in. Lady Margaret's sharp gaze stayed fixed on Isabella. Her lips pursed. Robert Lang, the journalist, quietly adjusted his phone to capture Isabella's rant, recognizing evidence of the family's arrogance unraveling live. Elena Cortez clenched her glass until her knuckles whitened, fury simmering at the familiar cruelty. Amara's breath was even, her silence deliberate. Every second she refused to respond made Isabella's desperation more visible. The young Whitmore wanted tears, outrage, a stumble she could immortalize for her followers. Instead, she faced composure, and it infuriated her. "Say something," Isabella hissed, the grin slipping as she shoved the phone inches from Amara's face. "Go on, prove me wrong. Or are you afraid the whole world will see what you really are?" The room held its breath. Even the musicians faltered, bows trembling above strings, every gaze locked on Amara, waiting. She finally spoke. Her voice was soft, calm, but it carried. "You're right." The words startled Isabella, a flicker of triumph flashing across her face. But Amara's next words sliced it clean away. "I'll never be one of you." Silence, sudden and heavy. Isabella's phone captured every syllable, the comments freezing midstream. Amara leaned slightly forward, her eyes steady, her tone unwavering. "I'm better." The words landed like a hammer, cracking the room in two. Gasps broke the silence, some sharp, others hushed. Isabella's hand trembled, the phone shaking as thousands of viewers erupted with comments. "What?" She flipped it. Queen energy. "Isa, you just got dragged live." Isabella's face drained of color, her smirk collapsing. For the first time, she looked less like a predator and more like prey, exposed under the weight of Amara's simple truth. Amara didn't raise her glass in triumph. She didn't smile. She simply stood, her dignity intact, her words echoing in the vaulted hall. Maya closes the moment. This wasn't arrogance, this was clarity. And sometimes, clarity is louder than cruelty ever could be. The crowd's energy shifted entirely. Some guests lowered their eyes, ashamed at their laughter moments earlier. Others looked at the Whitmores with unease, sensing they had just watched the balance of power begin to tilt. And still, the live stream rolled on, broadcasting not Amara's humiliation, but Isabella's collapse. The question now lingered heavy in the hall. If this was only the beginning of Amara's strength, what would the end look like for the Whitmores? The ballroom buzzed with the aftershock of Amara's words, "I'm better." Those two syllables lingered in the air like smoke after a cannon blast. Guests who had moments ago laughed now stood uncertain, their applause faltering. Isabella lowered her phone slightly, her smirk gone, her live stream comments spiraling into chaos. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence returned, commanding the room more effectively than any raised voice. But inside, a decision solidified. Enough patience, enough observation. She stepped aside, heels clicking softly against the polished floor, moving toward a quieter corner near the marble columns. The crowd instinctively shifted, giving her space though no one asked them to. Eyes followed her every move, curious, anxious, afraid. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. The action was unremarkable, ordinary, yet it froze the entire hall. The same woman they had mocked, now holding a device, looked suddenly dangerous, as though that phone carried more weight than all their generational wealth combined. She pressed a single button. The call connected instantly. "Evelyn," she said, her voice steady, almost serene. "Pull every dollar, cancel the Whitmore merger, effective immediately." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were surgical, lethal, final. For a moment, silence blanketed the hall. Then whispers spread like cracks in glass. Did she say merger? She can't mean the Whitmore deal. No, she's bluffing. But the unease was real. Some guests fumbled for their own phones, curiosity outweighing etiquette. Fingers tapped rapidly, screens lit, and within seconds the first gasps erupted. Whitmore Holdings stock was plummeting. On every screen, breaking news alerts flashed in red. Novosphere Technologies withdraws merger talks. Whitmore Holdings faces immediate fallout. A man near the Champagne Tower cursed under his breath, spinning toward the Whitmores with a look of horror. A woman at the piano clutched her pearls, her phone trembling in her hand as numbers dropped in real time. Lord Whitmore's face drained of color. "This is impossible," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. His hands shook as he reached for his own phone, struggling to unlock it. Eleanor leaned toward him, whispering frantically, but her eyes betrayed panic. Charles Jr. laughed nervously, though the sound cracked halfway through. "It's a stunt," he declared. "She doesn't have that kind of—" His voice died as his own notification appeared, bold and merciless. The ticker showed Whitmore Holdings collapsing by billions within minutes. Isabella, still live, had forgotten her performance. Her viewers now flooded her feed with comments she couldn't control. "Wait, she's the Novosphere CEO? Whitmore stock is tanking. I'm watching CNBC. Isa just broadcasted her family's destruction live." The internet never forgets. The camera she had wielded as a weapon now betrayed her, documenting her family's unraveling in real time. Amara slipped her phone back into her clutch. No raised voice, no dramatic gestures. Just quiet execution. She turned back toward the crowd, her expression unchanged, her composure intact. Maya's narration threads in. Racism blinds. It convinces the arrogant that cruelty is power, when true power is silent, waiting, and strikes when arrogance is at its loudest. Guests began edging away from the Whitmores, distancing themselves as though their fortune were contagious in its collapse. A hedge fund manager muttered, "We need to cut ties immediately." Another whispered, "She just erased $35 billion with one call." Lady Margaret's lips curled into the faintest smile. She had seen arrogance topple before, but rarely with such precision. Robert Lang, the journalist, typed furiously, knowing the story of the year was unfolding before his eyes. Elena Cortez closed her eyes briefly, satisfaction flickering across her face as justice landed without her lifting a finger. Lord Whitmore slammed his glass onto the nearest table, shattering it. "This is a mistake. You don't know what you're doing," he shouted, his voice trembling with something he hadn't felt in decades, fear. Amara met his gaze calmly. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm giving your empire what it's earned." The hall trembled with murmurs, the aristocratic elegance dissolving into chaos. Guests flooded toward the exits, phones in hand, desperate to confirm their own financial exposure. The Whitmore's empire wasn't just bleeding, it was collapsing in front of everyone who mattered. And at the center of it all stood the woman they had mocked, untouched. Her midnight blue gown glowing under the lights as if it were armor. The Whitmores had tried to humiliate her. Instead, they had broadcast their own downfall. The live streams still rolled, thousands watching as the family that once ruled with arrogance fell apart in seconds. And in that moment, Amara Johnson had rewritten the narrative. Not as an outsider begging for entry, not as a guest tolerated at someone else's table, but as the woman who decided whether the Whitmores had a future at all. The first phone buzzed, then another and another. Within moments, the ballroom was alive with a chorus of vibrating devices. Guests glanced at their screens, their polished faces draining of color as breaking news alerts stacked one after the other. Whitmore Holdings loses $12 billion overnight. Merger collapsed, Novosphere withdraws. Investors flee, panic spreads. The marble floor that had just echoed with laughter now trembled beneath a different kind of noise, panic. Whispered conversations sharpened into frantic voices, clashing with the fading notes of the string quartet that had stopped playing altogether. One guest muttered into his phone, "Sell everything now." Another clutched her pearls, gasping, "My fund is exposed. We're finished." The Whitmores, once untouchable in their own hall, found themselves standing in a shrinking circle. Guests who had laughed the loudest only minutes before began stepping back, inching away as though their proximity to the family might stain their fortunes. Glasses were set down hurriedly. Chairs scraped as powerful allies became sudden strangers. Isabella's phone live stream captured it all. Her once proud smirk had vanished, replaced by hollow eyes as the flood of comments mocked not Amara but her. "Your family's done. This is the most expensive live stream in history. She ruined you with one call, and you filmed it." Charles Jr. barked desperately. "It's temporary, just a glitch." His voice cracked, failing to convince even himself. He checked his phone again, his hands trembling, the stock ticker plummeting in red arrows that mocked every boast he had ever made about legacy. Eleanor's mask of composure shattered. She grabbed Lord Whitmore's arm. "Do something," she hissed, her voice low but frantic. "Call the board. Call the lawyers. Stop this." But Lord Whitmore stood frozen, the patriarch undone. For decades, his voice had commanded boardrooms, silenced critics, charmed politicians. Now no word would come. His empire was evaporating in front of his guests, his family, his children. Maya's narration cuts in. Racism always carries a cost, sometimes hidden, sometimes delayed. But tonight, the Whitmores paid the price in real time. $35 billion lost. Not to competition, not to markets, but to arrogance so blinding they mocked the only person who could save them. The crowd fractured further. A senator who had been laughing at Amara's expense earlier now slipped out the side door, whispering into his phone. A European banker gestured angrily at his assistant. "We should never have tied our credit line to them." Investors who had treated the Whitmores like royalty an hour ago now treated them like contagion. Lady Margaret remained seated, her cane resting against her arm. She watched with sharp eyes as the dynasty's arrogance crumbled into desperation. "You reap what you sow," she whispered softly, though loud enough for those near her to hear. Elena Cortez's lips curled into the faintest smile, vindication warming her chest. Years ago, she had warned of the empire's hollow numbers. Tonight, she didn't need to say a word. Justice had arrived without her lifting a finger. Robert Lang typed furiously, his article already forming. "A dynasty collapses. The night racism cost the Whitmores $35 billion. He had the live stream clips, the documents, the quotes. Tomorrow, the world would read about how legacy fell not because of bad business alone, but because arrogance had blinded them to the power standing in front of them. The Whitmores huddled together now, no longer towering figures, but a family unraveling in plain sight. Isabella clutched her phone like a lifeline, tears streaking her perfect makeup as she whispered, "Stop the comments. Just stop them." Amara did not move toward them. She didn't need to. Her call had already set the course, and the world outside these walls was finishing what she had started. Maya's voice closes the scene. The Whitmores mocked heritage, mocked race, mocked dignity. And for that, they lost more than money. They lost the illusion of power. $35 billion gone in a single night. The price tag of racism paid in full. Around her, the ballroom emptied quickly. Allies vanished, supporters melted away, leaving the Whitmores isolated on their own polished floor. The empire they had guarded for centuries now lay in ruins, and they could not escape the truth. Amara's silence had made clear. The family had tried to humiliate her. Instead, they had humiliated themselves, before the cameras, before their guests, before the world. And as the night drew on, one fact could no longer be denied. The Whitmores' dynasty had collapsed, not because of markets, but because of their own arrogance. The music had long since died. The chatter that once filled the Whitmores' ballroom had emptied into silence, broken only by the frantic whispers of a family watching their empire disintegrate. What began as laughter and mockery ended in phones buzzing with ruin. And yet, at the center of it all, Amara Johnson remained unchanged. She had never raised her voice. She had never demanded recognition. She had simply stood, dignified, composed, unwavering, and let the Whitmores reveal themselves. Their downfall was not the work of an enemy, nor of misfortune, but of their own arrogance. Maya closes with reflection. The Whitmores mocked dignity, but they destroyed themselves. Amara never raised her voice. She simply revealed where true power lives, not in bloodlines, but in character. Around the world, headlines spread within hours. Whitmore fortune implodes after Gala humiliation. Racist outburst costs family $35B in a night. Novosphere CEO ends talks. Whitmore's collapse. Screens replayed Isabella's live stream, showing in cruel clarity how a dynasty mocked a black entrepreneur, only to lose everything because of it. The irony was undeniable. They had measured worth by heritage, by race, by arrogance. But the one they dismissed as an outsider held more power in her silence than they had in centuries of wealth. Amara didn't need to shout her worth. She didn't need to parade her success. She embodied the truth that dignity, even under attack, carries a force no insult can erase. The Whitmore's empire crumbled, but Amara's presence became something more than a victory. It became a symbol. Maya reflects further. This is what racism costs. It isn't abstract. It isn't harmless. It carries a price tag, and sometimes that price tag is billions. But beyond the money, the greater cost was this. The Whitmores revealed their legacy was hollow. They built walls of arrogance, but those walls could not stand against dignity. For the guests who had watched in silence, the night was a lesson. Some left ashamed, realizing their laughter had aligned them with cruelty. Others left awakened, understanding that standing by is never neutral. And those who stood quietly beside Amara, Margaret with her sharp eyes, Elena with her steady presence, Robert with his relentless truth, left knowing that sometimes the tide of history turns on the dignity of one person refusing to bow. The image of Amara in her midnight blue gown, standing tall while an empire collapsed around her, became more than a memory. It became a reminder etched into the minds of all who witnessed it. True power isn't inherited. True power is character. The Whitmores had mocked her dress, her voice, her presence. They had mistaken her calm for weakness. But calm is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. Dignity is not absence. Each can be strategy, strength, defiance. And on that night, Amara proved that silence, when paired with resolve, can roar louder than a dynasty's fortune. The ballroom emptied. The Whitmores stood alone in the ruins of their pride, while Amara walked out unbroken, unbothered, unstoppable. And as we close this story, one question remains for you. The one listening now. What would you have done if you were Amara Johnson? Would you have endured their cruelty in silence, or spoken sooner? Would you have given them a second chance, or ended everything with one phone call? Drop your thoughts below, share your country flag, and don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. Because stories like this remind us, dignity is priceless.